$6,500 is what I spent on this camera, and that's just the body, not including the lens. And that is a lot of money to spend on a camera. But there's a few reasons why I decided to upgrade to the Sony a1 II. And in this video, I want to talk about why I think it's the perfect camera for me, share my experiences with it shooting so far, and also talk about why I don't think this camera is best for most people out there. Now, I've been a Sony shooter for almost 10 years now, and I'm deeply embedded into the ecosystem. I have a ton of lenses, I have a few different camera bodies, and I've always been the photographer that goes out with a ton of gear. I'll go out with a giant backpack filled with a 70-200, a 24-70, a 16-35, whatever it is, you name it. And the reason for that is because I never wanted to miss a shot. But as I've grown as a photographer, one of the things that I value more than anything else is just having less gear and carrying less gear when I'm out shooting. There's less to worry about. And also, you're not fiddling around with your gear trying to capture all these different variations of a shot, when oftentimes you can do it with just one camera and one lens. And over the last few years, I've really enjoyed just going out and shooting with a lot less gear, but I still had to bring two cameras with me to get the quality that I was after. And that was the Sony a7 IV for photography and the Sony a7S III for video. And both of these are fantastic cameras. The a7 IV is amazing. It shoots great photo, great video, but there are certain situations where that camera really fell short, especially when you're shooting something that's moving very quickly. The rolling shutter was just absolutely horrendous, and I really noticed it when I was shooting in Japan. The fast moving trains, it just really struggled with some of those shots. And on the other hand, the a7S III is a fantastic video camera. It's one of the best out there, but for photography, it really fell short. So I had to bring both of these cameras with me until I got the Sony a1 II, which is a hybrid camera beast. This thing is absolutely incredible for photos. It's absolutely incredible for videos. And that allows me to just carry one camera with me while I'm out and about. If I'm traveling to Europe, if I'm traveling through Asia, or I'm going back home to the US, I can bring one camera and know that I am not compromising anything in terms of photo or video capabilities. And so far, this thing has been an absolute joy to shoot with. Unfortunately, I was sick with the flu for like 10 days, but I did still get out to Bangkok to shoot some street for a few days. And also I've been shooting here in Chiang Mai for a few days as well. Mostly street photography, just going out and kind of documenting scenes, shooting a little bit of video here and there. But first impressions with this camera, coming from someone that mainly shoots on the Sony a7 IV, this thing is absolutely insane. It's incredibly fast, it's quiet. The electronic shutter just completely blows my mind. And the quality of the images and the videos that I'm getting out of this thing are next to none. But most importantly, this camera is just an absolute blast to shoot with. The speed that it has, the power that it has, I'm really enjoying it so far, and I can't wait to shoot a little bit more. But I do want to talk about some of the individual features that this camera has that I find to be super, super useful, and also some of the ones that I don't find to be all that useful, even though a lot of the reviewers are talking about these things. But before we do that, I want to tell you guys about the sponsor of today's video, and that is Motion Array. And I just realized I've been wearing my AirPods this entire time, bro. I wear these things so often, I don't even realize that they're in my ear half the time. But for those of you guys that have been watching my content for a while now, you know how much value I get out of Motion Array as a video creator. I wish that making these videos was as easy as just going outside, shooting some footage, and just plugging it all together. But there's a lot more that goes into the editing process, and there's a lot of different assets that we need to create these polished videos. Things like royalty-free music, stock photos and videos, LUTs to color grade your videos, sound effects, motion graphics templates, the list goes on. And with Motion Array, I can download all of these assets in one simple place instead of spending hours trying to source them from different parts of the internet. And while Motion Array has already been an insane resource for me and thousands of other creators out there, it's getting even better in 2025. This year, Motion Array is doubling down on their 2024 efforts to increase the quality of their assets, and they're adding a ton of new features to their website as well. They've already added a LUTs category to the homepage, which has a ton of different LUTs created by expert colorists, and there's so many different LUTs that you can choose from to use to color grade your videos. And they're also adding a ton of new types of creative video assets like fonts, new filters to make it easy to find the exact assets that you're looking for, new generative AI features to keep your content up to date, and one-of-a-kind content from exclusive collabs with some of the world's top artists, which is something they've already been doing over the last few years, so I'm glad that they're doubling down on this. And if you're new to creating and editing sounds a little bit scary, they're also adding a drag and drop assets category for assets that are super easy to use in your video. All you have to do is drag and drop. Now, the best part is you get access to all of these assets. There's thousands of them for just an affordable monthly subscription. Motion Array really has established itself as a platform that cares about creativity creators and wants to give us assets that are up to date, and 2025 definitely fits that vision. So if you're creating videos and you want to get access to thousands of high quality assets, definitely check out Motion Array. I'll put a link down in the description. And with that link, you can get 2 months free when you sign up for the annual plan. Thank you so much, Motion Array, for sponsoring this video and being such a legendary sponsor of the channel. Now let's get back to the video. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the upgraded body on the Sony a1 II. Now, this is basically identical to the a9 III, which is a camera that I have never held, so I couldn't tell you anything about it. But I really like the upgrades on the build quality of this camera, and the main one being the flippy screen. This thing is such a massive upgrade coming from the a7 IV. I missed being able to shoot from the hip so much on that camera. Yes, you can pull the screen out to the side and it kind of works in the same way, but it's just not easy to do. It's kind of a hassle. So being able to just easily flip this screen out while also still having the ability to look at myself while I'm recording myself, this screen is just such a massive game changer, both for photography and for video. And I'm so happy that they finally added this screen to the A1 series. It also does have a deeper grip compared to the older generation of cameras, which is nice, but to be honest, not something that I care about all that much. I found the a7 IV to be totally sufficient in that regard. And it also has some upgraded dials on the top here. To be honest, I don't really use these. I'm so used to going through the menu, and I'm not a sports photographer, so I'm not going to be switching between my drive modes all that much. I typically just stick it in the low drive mode and shoot with that. And also, I never ever change my autofocus mode. I always shoot in continuous autofocus, and I use back button autofocus in conjunction with that. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the autofocus now because we are going to talk about that in a little bit here. But the other thing that I think is pretty cool is this speed burst button on the front. And once again, I'm not a sports photographer, but I did find this super useful when I was shooting street in Bangkok. I was shooting in a small alleyway and there was a little road at the end and the motorbikes were driving by super quick and I could hear them coming, but I didn't know exactly when they were going to appear in that gap. So being able to shoot at 30 frames per second, I knew for a fact that I wasn't going to miss any of those shots. Now, yes, you are going to get a lot more photos when you're out shooting if you're using that feature, but it is nice to have and something that I think I will definitely use when I'm shooting street in the future, because I do typically tend to shoot quite quickly. I like to move around a lot and, you know, shoot quick scenes from the hip. So that is something that I find pretty valuable. But besides that, the build quality is great. I've never had any issues with the Sony camera. So yeah, some nice upgrades, but that's not the real reason why I think this camera is so great. Now, from a photography perspective, this camera really starts to shine. And the first thing I noticed when I picked this thing up was just how crazy the electronic shutter is. You basically can't shoot with the electronic shutter on any of the A7 series cameras. If there's no movement in your scene, it's going to look fine. But anytime there's any artificial lights in the scene or there's any movement whatsoever, that image is just going to fall apart so quickly. So when I picked this thing up and started shooting with the electronic shutter, I was blown away by how fast this thing is. And there's basically no rolling shutter when you're shooting with the electronic shutter. There's hardly any difference between the electronic and the mechanical shutter in this camera, and that is new to me. I'm definitely not used to shooting with an electronic shutter. So it's been a bit of a learning curve using that because I don't have that nice mechanical shutter that I'm used to on the Sony a7 IV, but it just feels like a completely different camera, and it's been a joy to use the electronic shutter so far. But the thing that's really blown me away with this camera is the autofocus. Now, the autofocus on the a7 IV or any of the modern a7 series cameras is great. It's super fast, but it's not necessarily smart. And the new AI autofocus features on this camera have genuinely completely changed the way I use autofocus on my camera. On the Sony a7 IV, I almost always use a small autofocus point, and I would point that at my subject, use my back button autofocus to lock focus, and then just use the shutter button to capture the photo. But the issue with that was when a subject was moving and they were in a part of the frame where that autofocus point wasn't situated. Now, the Sony a7 IV did have a good tracking system, but it does not even come close to the tracking system on the A1 II. So on the A1 II, I set my focus area to the small tracking spot. And when you use that in conjunction with back button autofocus, you're essentially getting the same functionality of a small autofocus point, and when you need it, a tracking point as well. So now if I have a moving subject, what I'll do is I'll point that small point at them and then I'll just hold that back button autofocus and then I can recompose, and the A1 II is not going to lose focus on that moving subject unless it's a super complicated scene. But so far I found that tracking spot to be incredibly sticky. I was shooting people on motorbikes, I was shooting animals, I was shooting cars, and almost every time the autofocus would stay locked on that subject. No matter how many times I would recompose that shot, as long as I was holding that back button autofocus, the camera did not miss. So that alone is a huge upgrade over the a7 IV for me, and it really really has changed the way I take photos. I don't want to have to think about focusing my camera. I choose Sony cameras because they don't get in the way of creativity, and the Sony a1 II definitely takes that to the next level. Now the sensor inside this camera is exactly the same as the original sensor in the Sony a1. It's a 50 megapixel sensor, it's double stacked, so it's incredibly fast, and apparently it has improved dynamic range and all these different things, especially when you compare it to some of the other cameras in the lineup. But to be honest, I'm not really a pixel peeper. I just want the camera to work and I want photos that look good, and I've been super impressed with the quality of the images that I've been getting with this thing. I've been editing Sony files for many years now, and I feel like I understand them quite well. And comparing these images to the images of the Sony a7 IV, they definitely look a little bit better. They look a little bit sharper. The quality just seems to be a little bit more improved. But once again, like I said, I'm not a pixel peeper, and I was happy with the images from the a7 IV, but I can definitely feel that this is a big upgrade in terms of image quality. So I'm pretty stoked about that. But I didn't choose this camera just for its photo capabilities. For me, shooting video is equally as important. And if you're just a photographer, then this camera is probably not the best camera for you. But if you're a hybrid shooter and your business depends on both photo and video, and you want to do that all in one body, then this is an amazing camera for that purpose. I shoot just as much video as I do photos these days for my YouTube channel, for client work. So I want a camera that can really do it all. And the video from this camera is absolutely incredible, to the point where I've sold my a7S III because this camera, in my opinion, is a better video camera than the Sony a7S III. And one reason for that is because of the improved autofocus that this camera has. It's a big upgrade over the Sony a7S III, and also the image quality looks to be a little bit better as well. Once again, I'm not a pixel peeper, but our Lord and Savior Gerald Undone did compare these two cameras, and the image quality out of the A1 was a little bit better than the a7S III. And this camera does shoot 8K as well, but to be honest, that's something that I probably won't use all that much. Maybe if I'm shooting in the mountains and something is super far away and I want to zoom in a little bit, that 8K will come in handy. But I'm super happy with 4K, and when you go to 8K, you have to deal with much larger file sizes, and they're also more difficult to edit. So for me, I'm totally cool with 4K, but it is nice that this camera does give the option to shoot in 8K as well. Now, some of you guys might be thinking, well, Sean, the dual native ISO on the Sony a7S III is 800 and 12,800, whereas on the Sony a1, it's only 800 to 4,000. And yeah, you'd be correct. If you're shooting in extreme low light, the a7S III is a better camera for that. But I'm often not shooting in extreme low light scenarios. I'm much more likely to hover around 4,000 or 8,000 ISO when I'm shooting video. And the Sony a7S III has much more grain at those ISOs. So you have to go up to 12,800 for that image to clean up. And sometimes I don't want to have to stop down my aperture to account for all of that extra light. So for me, even though this does have a lower dual native ISO compared to the Sony a7S III, I still think it's more useful for me in the majority of scenarios. But okay, let's sum things up and talk about who this camera is for, and also if it's actually worth the $6,500 price tag, which is a lot of money for a camera. And in the beginning of this video, I said that this camera is not for everyone, and I genuinely believe that. If you're primarily a photographer, get a Sony a7R5, or if you're a hobbyist and you want a good camera that can shoot both photo and video and you don't want to spend all that much money, get a Sony a7 IV or the upcoming Sony a7 V, which is supposed to come out this year or maybe in 2026. And if you're a video shooter, get a Sony a7S III or an FX3. Those are fantastic video cameras. This camera is not going to be the best photo camera. It's not going to be the best video camera, but it is the best hybrid camera on the market. And once again, as someone that just wants to carry one camera with me while I'm traveling, I want to shoot great photos, I want to shoot great videos, this camera can't be beat in that regard. It truly is the best hybrid camera on the market, and I'm super stoked with it so far. But since this camera was released, you can get the original A1 for $1,000 off. And if you get it on the used market, you can get it even cheaper, which I would highly recommend doing if you are looking at picking up that original Sony A1. So is this really worth a few $1,000s more than the original A1? Well, it all comes down to a few things. Do you want that improved screen? And do you want that improved autofocus? Those are really the only things that are major upgrades over the original A1. Now for me, I'm totally happy to pay a few extra $1,000s for just the screen. Honestly, the screen is incredible. And once again, I absolutely adore the autofocus on this camera as well. So for me, who's running a creative business full-time, I have clients, I have YouTube, I'm constantly making content, this camera is a no-brainer for me in taking my business to the next level. So I'm super happy with this camera so far, and honestly, I'm really stoked to shoot with it more. I have some portrait shoots planned when I get back to Bali next month, and also I'm going to be going to Europe later this year, where I'm really going to shoot a ton of content on this camera. You guys know I love shooting shooting in Europe. So I'm really stoked to shoot with it a little bit more, and I hope it helps you guys decide on whether or not this camera is right for you. Once again, it's right for me, but it's not right for everybody, and $6,500 is a lot of money to pay for a camera. But I really hope this video was helpful for you guys. It's good to be back on YouTube. I took some time off for the holidays, and I'm excited to start creating again. So thank you guys so much for watching to the end of this video, and also thank you Motion Array for sponsoring this video as well. It is greatly appreciated, and I will catch you guys again very soon.